All right. And we are back. Steve Cully, best podcast radio host in the universe. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Hulkster, Hulk Hogan, my idol who tragically died today. And I was talking about his early years. I read both of his autobiographies, and he spent quite a bit of time in Florida. Like I said, he trained with Hiro Matsuda, a legendary wrestler from Japan who was part of FCW, and he broke his ankle within 5 minutes because Hulk had been going to the weight rooms, he was a member at several gyms, talking to the wrestlers, asking about how to break into the business. And back then it was very, very protected because they did not want the secrets to get out, so to speak, the curtain to be pulled back as it has been. And, it was considered real. And I still say it is real to a very extent, choreographed, but real. So after Matsuda broke Hulk's ankle, he was home for several months on the mend, healing up. But as soon as possible, when he was healthy and cleared, he went back. He went back to FCW. He went back to Matsuda. He said, "You're not going to break me. You can break my ankle. You're not going to break me." And Matsuda then started to work with him, then started to train him, then saw that he was not just the hair guy from a band wanting to be a wrestler. He had the desire, he had the determination to do so. So Matsuda trained him. And as I said, he went to several different territories and he struggled. And he struggled, back then. He stuck out because they said he was 6'8", but he was really 6'4", 6'5", 320 pounds, and he had a body on him. And that immediately made other performers nervous and not wanting to help him as much because someone with that look, with that size, it's going to take someone's job. So he didn't get support. And I had talked about how he ended up in New York with Vince McMahon Sr. in the late 70s. He was with Bruno Sammartino for a short period of time. He feuded with Andre the Giant. And like I said, they had their blow off match at Shea Stadium for the event. I believe it, like I said, it was either Bruno versus Stan Hansen because Stan Hansen had broken Bruno's neck accidentally, or it was for the Antonio Inoki fight against Muhammad Ali. And the story goes with that, Vince Sr. and Japanese promoters paid a ton of money to get this thing booked, to get Ali on the card. Ali was a fan of pro wrestling. And in his biography, he talks about Buddy Rogers and I think Gorgeous George being his favorite. But it was supposed to be a wrestling match to an extent, a boxer versus a wrestler, but it was going to be choreographed. However, they could not come to terms on the rules for it. Inoki's camp, Ali's camp could not come to terms. So what happened was it ended up being a true boxer versus wrestler match with several rules in between. And it turned out to be a disaster of a match with Inoki on his back kicking at Ali, and which actually did some damage to his legs. But Hulk, I think, was on that card at Shea Stadium. He lost to Andre the Giant, and he had feuded with Andre for a while. He also feuded with Tony Atlas, and he had Classy Freddie Blassie was his first manager. Now, what happened was in 1981, Sylvester Stallone contacted Hulk Hogan. And the reason being was the casting director for Rocky 3, the son, and it's funny how it worked out, Henry Holmes. Henry Holmes was the son who actually turned out to become Hulk Hogan's agent down the road. Henry Holmes told the casting director, "Oh, Hulk Hogan's the best wrestler around. That's the guy you got to get." So Sylvester Stallone sent a telegram to the arena, to WWE, WWF at the time, about having Hogan appearing in the movie. Hulk thought that the other wrestlers were playing a joke on him, as they call it, a rib, and he threw the letter away. This happened several times. The letter would come, he would see it, throw it away. Finally, it came registered mail, which he had to sign for, and he knew it was legit, and he called. Stallone answered, and he talked to Stallone, and Stallone's idea for Rocky 3 and having him play this character, Thunder Lips, and doing the boxer versus wrestler thing, and he'd be perfect for it. Hulk said, "Absolutely, I'm in." He goes to Vince McMahon Sr., tells him, "Hey, I got this great opportunity. I'm going to be in Rocky 3. I'm going to be in a movie. I'm going to need some time off." Vince Sr. says, "Absolutely not." And Hulk was blown away by this. He was shocked. And Vince Sr. was old school. He said, "Listen, you're a wrestler. Wrestlers don't go to Hollywood. Wrestlers don't act in movies." So Vince basically said, "You can do the movie, but you're never going to work here again." And Hulk said, "Okay, I'm going." So he went out to Hollywood and he worked with Stallone, and they filmed Rocky 3. And lo and behold, when Rocky 3 came out in 1982, that is what put Hulk's career kind of in the stratosphere. He then signed with the AWA, which was out of Minnesota, and it was run by Vern Gagne. The AWA was famous for training some of the top stars. Vern Gagne was one of the most popular wrestlers in the 40s, 50s. He owned the promotion. He had been champion in the promotion for a while, basically because guys in those days moved around to the different territories. There were territories all over the country. New York, which was the WWF, Memphis, which I mentioned, Continental, which was in Alabama, Florida Championship Wrestling, Florida, Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, that's where Ric Flair primarily wrestled, which was in the Carolinas. Then you had the Von Erichs and WCCW, which was in Dallas, Texas, Sportatorium. And there were territories out west as well. So Hulk went to the AWA, and he initially, he had been a heel, which is a bad guy, in the WWF. He'd been a heel everywhere he'd been. So they tried making him a heel in the AWA. Greg Gagne, Vern's son, and the other wrestlers and Vern himself noticed immediately. They paired him with a manager, Johnny Valiant, and immediately they noticed whatever happened, they cheered him. They were cheering him non-stop. He had gotten over, as they say, like none other. Um, and the AWA was really a good schedule because they would work from the fall to the summer, and then they would take the summers off because summer shows didn't draw. And the AWA would go to like Milwaukee, they would go to Chicago, obviously Minneapolis, St. Paul, Denver. They would do some shows up in Canada. That was kind of their territory and the territory system. And when Hulk got there, immediately he became a star. He became a star. And at the time, Nick Bockwinkel was the AWA heavyweight champion. Nick Bockwinkel was, again, he's a legendary wrestler. He's in the WWE Hall of Fame, one of the best. And Hulk used to wrestle tag matches with the High Flyers, which was Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell. Hulk would be the third partner. And they would wrestle. Andre the Giant was in the territory at that time. That was fun to watch. Bobby Duncombe was in the territory at that time. He was another heel. His son wrestled in WCW later on, but they would have 6-man tag matches, and the tearing of the shirt started. Greg Gagne and Jim Brunzell would tear the shirt off of Hulk. And it got such a huge response that Hulk started to do it when he wrestled his individual matches. He learned a lot in the AWA. Vern Gagne is credited, not by the WWE, but he is credited for really helping Hulk find his character, find how to talk, how to cut a promo the right way. And that's when he really took off and became a superstar during his time there. He started to be in main events, I believe, in 1983. However, Hulk would spend a significant amount of time in Japan during breaks. So the AWA had it in their contract with Hulk that he could go over to Japan for 6 weeks in the spring or whatever. He could go over in the fall because Hulk, before anything, and Dave Meltzer from the Wrestling Observer often talks about this because people get history wrong, and history is written by the victors, which was the WWE. Hulk was more over in Japan than he was anywhere. The Japanese fans went crazy for him. He teamed with Stan Hansen. He teamed sometimes with Antonio Inoki, who became part of the government over there. And that's where he had such a massive fan base. And then he would come back to the States and work in the AWA. So Vern Gagne wanted Hulk to be champion, but he didn't think he was there yet. And they got into a dispute because Hulk knew his stardom and he knew that there were other revenue streams out there. So he started printing his own Hulkamania shirts, Hulk Hogan shirts. And he basically was selling them out of his car. And, Vern, it wasn't in his contract, but Vern asked Hulk, hey, am I going to get a piece of the money that you made in Japan from your merchandise sales? Oh, and Hulk's like, no. Like, I did that all myself. Everything I did in Japan is mine. And they actually came to blows over it because Vern, even though he was in his 50s, thought he was tougher than everyone and would challenge people. and tried to take on Hulk, and Hulk put a chin lock on him and ended things fairly quickly. But this is where the dissension started. They wanted Hulk to win the championship from Bockwinkel, but they could not come to a long-term agreement. Back then, there were no contracts. Everything was a handshake, and you would be on your way. Hey, I'm going to be in your territory for 6 months, a year. I'll be on my way. There was no agents. There was no written contracts. It was kind of done with a gentleman's agreement. So they had a show. It was Super Sunday. I believe it was April of 1983. And they had canceled the week before to purposely raise ticket prices. And they filled the St. Paul Civic Center. So much so that I believe they had some of it on closed circuit TV because people couldn't get in the building. And Hulk fought Bockwinkel for the title. So, as this happened, again, negotiations with Vern didn't go well. The relationship was deteriorating, and they ended up with a screw job finish, unfortunately. Hulk threw Bockwinkel over the top rope, and in the AWA, that was considered a disqualification. Hulk actually pinned Bockwinkel to make things worse, and then Stanley Blackburn, the commissioner of the AWA, came out to say, oh, he threw him over the top rope. You got to disqualify him. So Hulk had the belt, and the ref announced that he was being disqualified. And a riot literally almost broke out in the St. Paul Civic Center. Hulk wrote in his book he had to get on the microphone to try to calm things down so the people would not riot, because they were furious that this happened. You know, they felt they got taken. Ticket prices were raised. The weekly show before was canceled. Everyone was expecting a title change. Doesn't happen. Meanwhile, the rest of the year goes on. Hulk gets a call from a very unlikely source, Vince McMahon. Now, it's not Vince McMahon Sr., it's Vince McMahon Jr., who was planning to take over the company. And he wanted to come out and meet Hulk face to face. Hulk was dating his ex-wife now, but his girlfriend at the time, Linda. And Linda actually picked him up from the airport. And Hulk told Linda, look for a guy in a weird colored suit with shoulder pads, because that's what Vince wore. Linda picked him out immediately. They went back to the townhouse, and they talked hours upon hours all through the night. And then I think it was like 5 or 6 a.m. They had a handshake agreement that Hulk was going to go to the newly WWF. Vince was not satisfied with what his father was doing. Bob Backlund had been the new champion. Now going on, I believe 78. It was going on like 6 years to 84. Vince told Hulk, basically, you're going to come in. You're my guy. We're going to give you the belt. We're going to push you to the moon. No problem. And the way Hulk tells it, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall take credit for being the ones that got the first guaranteed contracts. Hulk said, I got a guaranteed contract back in 1984. It was me. I was the first one. Now, Hulk obviously liked to work people which means lie. So we're not entirely sure, but I'm pretty sure he got a great deal. So Hulk comes to the WWF. He does this and he sends a telegram to Vern Gagne. He didn't tell him to his face. Vern thought that someone was playing a joke on him, didn't believe it. But Hulk then didn't show up for scheduled appearances, scheduled events. And, he had Greg Gagne call Hulk and said, yeah, I'm going to WWF. And Greg was like, come here, finish out your dates, and then go. And Hulk said, well, I can't. Vince is paying me too much not to. So he didn't show back up. And the AWA took a lot of crap because they still advertised Hulk being at these shows when they knew for sure that he wasn't going to be there. Hulk debuted, and Hulk also brought an entourage from the AWA, the guys he liked working with, over to WWF. Guys like Bobby the Brain Heenan, Mean Gene Okerlund, Jesse the Body Ventura, Adrian Adonis. So he brought guys over. He tried to help them and get them jobs. And his first appearance, I believe, was in December of '83, and it was in St. Louis. They created a storyline where I believe he teamed with Bob Backlund, who was the champion, because back then they would not do good guy versus good guy matches. They always wanted a bad guy versus a good guy. They always thought it drew better. So they didn't want Hogan to fight Bob Backlund, even though he had many times before in the late 70s when his first run with the WWF happened. So they created an angle where they teamed, and then the Iron Sheik had a match with Bob Backlund, and Bob Backlund's manager threw in the towel while he was in the Cobra Clutch submission hold. And that was the end of the match. The title changed hands, went to the Iron Sheik. The plan was always for it to go to the Sheik, then go to the Hulk. So for the month of January, Bob Backlund said, Hulk, I take my spot. You've changed your ways, and I'm behind you, which wasn't really true. Bob Backlund hates Hulk Hogan. I'll go to his grave hating Hulk Hogan. January 23rd, 1984. At a sold-out Madison Square Garden. The match had been announced previously, Hulk Hogan versus the Iron Sheik. And I remember reading in Hulk's book, the WWF did not do entrance music at that time. They were against it completely. Hulk was big because in the AWA, anytime he came out, they played Eye of the Tiger. That was his entrance music. So he went to pay the guy in charge $500 to play Eye of the Tiger for his entrance. So when Eye of the Tiger played on the sound, the crowd at Madison Square Garden went absolutely insane. I remember just watching it back recently, and it's just, you don't see wrestlers get that kind of reaction in this day and age that he was able to get. So he worked out a match with Iron Sheik, and allegedly Vern Gagne had called the Iron Sheik, offered him $100,000 to break Hogan's leg during the match. Again, we don't know if this is conjecture or not. The Iron Sheik said it was true. Hulk said it was true, but Sheik decided not to. because he knew that there was more money in having rematches with Hogan, and it was what was best for the company. What also happened, Vince McMahon revealed his plan to go nationwide. So all the other territories were going to be in trouble because the performers on the roster were better. What Vince did, he would go to the other territories, like Mid South, which was down in Louisiana. He signed the Junkyard Dog. He went to the Mid Atlantic territory. He almost signed Ric Flair, but he didn't get him. He signed Roddy Piper to come in. From Minnesota, he also brought Dr. D. David Schultz to come in. So he was handpicking the talent from the territories all over the country, and he was having him sign contracts for the first time. Basically, the guarantee was not much. I remember Kevin Nash said you were only guaranteed like 15 shows and to make $1,500 a year. However, you obviously were going to make more with that being with the top company. So Hulkamania was born January 23rd, 1984. And it took off from there. He had some incredible feuds with the Masked Superstar, which was Bill Eadie. He had a feud with Big John Studd that was excellent. And that's kind of when Vince, basically WCW, Mid-Atlantic had been putting on a super show called Starrcade, and it was on closed circuit television. Back then, what that meant was the show was available at movie theaters around the country, and you could go pay and watch the show. Vince wanted to top that. So he wanted to do a super show, and allegedly, WrestleMania was born. The name came from ring announcer Howard Finkel, which I just think is awesome and hilarious. So Hogan's run throughout 84 was great. Roddy Piper was feuding with Jimmy Snuka. He broke the coconut over his head, and before Snuka got in trouble, Bob Backlund eventually quit the company. Sergeant Slaughter was also on the roster. He ended up quitting the company because he would not give Vince a cut of his G.I. Joe money because G.I. Joe was paying him. But again, you're bringing in all these other guys, the top talent. Like I said, Roddy Piper, Junkyard Dog, Ricky Steamboat came in. And this is when Bret Hart came in. I think it was shortly after or before WrestleMania. Jim the Anvil Neidhart came in. The British Bulldogs came in. So the roster of the WWE, I mean, it was the best around. And Greg Gagne used to joke, like, when the WWE came to Minneapolis, they had more AWA guys on their roster than we had. And that was true. So the idea was pitched for WrestleMania. They had to make it special. They had to make it a spectacle. So they got Cyndi Lauper involved. Cyndi Lauper would be, like Britney Spears was 20 years ago. She was the best of the best. Hulk Hogan went to the Grammy Awards in a cutoff tuxedo as Cyndi Lauper's date. I would love to wear a cutoff tuxedo. Probably could pull it off. So they were getting bigger and bigger. Captain Lou Albano was part of it, part of the angle, because he was in Cyndi Lauper's video. Girls just want to have fun, and I think Cyndi Lauper won a Grammy, and Hogan was right there with her. No one was hotter. So now they planned a feud to get Mr. T involved. Mr. T was on the A Team, a network television show. He was in Rocky 3. So what happened was Hulk was getting beat down. Mr. T jumped in the ring and saved him from it with, I think it was Roddy Piper and Cowboy Bob Orton. Roddy Piper absolutely despised Mr. T, did not want him in this. Paul Orndorff also came over from Mid Atlantic, and he was there. He went from being a good guy to a bad guy, back to a good guy and then a bad guy again, feuding with Hogan. Some of the legendary matches, but WrestleMania 1 was just truly freaking historic. And they did some great videos. The vignettes, as they're called. They would show Hulk and Mr. T training, and they would go to New York and like Central Park and get a huge crowd around them. And they would have them at a, outside, like doing dips or doing push-ups. Hulk would do push-ups with Mr. T on his back. Hulk would run with Mr. T, piggybacking him. He would have he would have Mr. T on his back, piggyback carrying him and running around with him. And they had vignettes of Piper and Orton training as well. That was the match. It was Hulk, Mr. T against Piper, Orton, and Jimmy Snuka was the guest referee. Muhammad Ali was he was supposed to be the guest referee. When they met with him, they kind of saw that he was deteriorating a little bit from the Parkinson's. So they're like, we can't put him in the ring. So they had him as the special guest outside enforcer. And WrestleMania was just a spectacle. It was a debut of King Kong Bundy. The show overall, if you watch it now, it doesn't pass the test of time. It had its moments. It was boring in certain times. The big match was Cyndi Lauper was in Wendy Richter's corner, and she was fighting the Fabulous Moolah for the belt. She won, and it was a huge celebration. And Wendy Richter tells it that, she was promised by Vince a huge push and she was going to be like Hulk Hogan. I don't think that would have happened. But so the main event comes. Mr. T allegedly was nervous and trying to back out of the match, and he showed up with an entourage that MSG would not let in. Hulk and Vince had to go and make sure they got everyone in, made sure Mr. T was going to go through with the match. They had to heavily choreograph it because Piper was very concerned with Mr. T trying to throw punches. He said, he's not a wrestler. He's not trained. I don't want him throwing punches because if I have to take a bump for him, it's going to look ridiculous. So whenever Mr. T was in with Piper, they did like chain wrestling. They did like real wrestling. I remember watching it. It was great. And the show was a massive, massive success for WWE. And a lot of it is attributed to the night before Mr. T and Hulk Hogan were the hosts of Saturday Night Live. And also Hulk Hogan, I believe to this day, is the one and only pro wrestler that was on the cover of Sports Illustrated. One and only wrestler who was on there. So after WrestleMania, man, it just took off, and I started watching, more in 1987, um, when he beat Andre the Giant in the Pontiac Silverdome, which I know he screwed up saying at another WrestleMania. And they played it up as the two had never faced off before, even though they had in the 70s. But again, within it, there was no internet back then, so no, if you weren't there, you didn't know. Um, and that was the main event. 93,000 in the Silverdome. Um, that's questioned. It could have been 80, 78, but WWE still lists it at 93,000. The match, Hulk Hogan always claimed, on the Andre the Giant biography, he claimed like he didn't know if he was going to win or lose. And he said he would ask Andre, it's like, hey, boss, what are we doing? Am I winning? Or are you winning? We're like, so Hulk would ask Andre, who's going over? You or me? Who's winning? And Andre wouldn't tell him. And allegedly, he didn't tell him until they entered the ring. Um, and before the match, which Hulk said they would never do, Hulk wrote down the match, basically choreographed it. He wrote down all the spots. He wrote down Andre being close to the ropes because his back was so bad. So he could use the ropes to help himself get up. And he said that Andre was drinking wine in the locker room before the match. And again, he was asking, so boss, what are we doing out there? What's going on? He said, and boss would say, no, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I got it. And then Hulk said when he got into the ring that Andre was calling out all the different things that Hulk had written down on the yellow legal pad because Hulk wrote it down, but he refused to go give it to Andre. He had Vince do it. And everything went as planned. The match that stole the show was Ricky Steamboat versus the Macho Man. That was awesome. Um, but the passing of the torch was Hulk beating Andre. And I just remember seeing it and just being like, wow. Like, because Hulk was big and there were rarely guys who were bigger. But back then, he would wrestle guys who were bigger. And nobody was bigger than Andre when he body slammed him and hit the leg drop for the pin. Man, that was awesome. That was really, really special. I love that. I love that. And then I lived for the Saturday night main events, always watching those, against Bundy, against the Honky Tonk Man. He fought Bundy several times. He fought Sika of the Wild Samoans. They always had a big match for him because, back then they would do basically the good wrestlers against the no names because they relied heavily on house show business. They would come to your town and do a show. So if you wanted to see them against their rival, you'd have to pay and go to the show. And I remember going to my first show in Utica when they came to the yacht, and I saw Andre the Giant and I saw Hulk Hogan in person. And again, I was mesmerized. And like I said, most people grow out of being a wrestling fan by the time they're 12. Um, I'm in my 40s and I'm still very much a wrestling fan. And Hulk had just a great run. Um, my favorite match, a couple of my favorite matches, WrestleMania 5 against the Macho Man. They laid it out for a full year feud. And it was over Macho Man's manager, Elizabeth. Hulk was getting too touchy feely with her. Macho Man, on a Saturday night's main event, they attacked each other. Macho Man said that Hulk had lust in his eyes, and they were tag teaming against the Twin Towers, the Big Boss Man and Akeem, who was also the one man gang. And that was just an amazing segment and powerful and emotional. You could just feel it. And when they got to WrestleMania 5, Macho Man had a terrible infection in his elbow. Terrible. He had to go to the hospital. He was on IV antibiotics. They drained it, and he checked himself out. They said, absolutely, you should not wrestle. He didn't give a shit. He was a Macho Man. And Hogan always worked well with the Macho Man because the Macho Man was so great at selling the moves and making Hulk look good, making him look superhuman. And I always loved that. That was one of my favorite matches. So then WrestleMania 6, the Ultimate Warrior. I did not watch that match until I believe it was 6 years later. Because I couldn't, like, we couldn't order the pay-per-view. I wasn't allowed to order the pay-per-view, and I was so afraid of him losing. When I found out he did lose, I didn't want to watch it. So for 6 or 7 years, I never watched the match. And the ruling was because it was it was the first time ever, the heavyweight title and the intercontinental title were both up for grabs. It would never, Hulk could only fight Warrior once. It was made the ruling by President Jack Tunney, who was useless. And I remember I watched it 6 years later, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like two guys who were body guys, not considered great wrestlers, workers by any stretch of the imagination. They had a phenomenal match and just told a great story. And I love that match. It's funny because if you ask me my two favorite Hulk Hogan matches, I would say against the Warrior at WrestleMania 6 and The Rock at WrestleMania 18. And there were two matches that he lost, which is crazy. So WrestleMania 6 happens, WrestleMania 7, they thought they were going to get a massive crowd. They booked the big outside arena where USC plays, the LA Coliseum. That's what it was. They expected to outdraw WrestleMania 3. They thought they were going to get 100 and something thousand fans. They played off the Gulf War, which was not smart. Sergeant Slaughter became a turncoat and was an Iraqi sympathizer. And the war had just ended, I believe. And, they didn't sell close to the amount of tickets they expected to. They moved it to the LA Sports Arena. I think it was 17,000 people. And, Warrior beat Hulk. He was champion throughout 1990. He didn't draw as well as Hulk did. So they moved the belt off of him, and Hulk got the belt back in 91. He beat Sergeant Slaughter. And then from there, it was just weird. He got embroiled in the steroid scandal. Dr. George Zahorian was arrested for distributing anabolic steroids, and he was sentenced and served his time in Pennsylvania. Hulk was initially supposed to testify at the trial, but his attorney was able to get the subpoena quashed because they were trying to say by him testifying it would do more damage to his career than help with the trial, because they already had plenty of witnesses saying Zahorian sold steroids. But the steroid scandal really deflated his career, so to speak, for a while. And you could see it if you look at him. If you look at him at WrestleMania 7 and his size, and then when they go to SummerSlam and you see him and he's teaming with the Warrior against Sergeant Slaughter, you can see like how much smaller he got. And I mean, he's still big by any standards, but he had gotten a lot smaller. And then he made the mistake. He went on the Arsenio Hall show and he was asked about steroids and he did not tell the truth. And he admitted he didn't tell the truth long after. He said he used it a couple times, when he tore his triceps for rehab. So he wasn't honest. And George Zahorian, during his testimony, said Hulk was a very big steroid abuser. And that's when things really crumbled. Hulk had a quote-unquote retirement match, WrestleMania 8, against Sid Justice. He didn't win. The Warrior made his return after being fired. And then Hulk was gone. He was gone for a year, and that was a Vince call to kind of let things die down. And they were going with, they couldn't have a champion with 24-inch pythons anymore. And then it was found out the federal government was going against Vince. They were trying to get him. And indictments were handed down, I believe in 93. And Vince went to trial, federal trial, for allegedly distributing anabolic steroids across state lines or whatever. The federal government did not have a very good case. I've read the trial transcripts and watched some of it, and it was basically disgruntled wrestlers talking about Vince. That's what the prosecution's case was. Sean something was the prosecutor, and he called many wrestlers. He called the Ultimate Warrior, which is amazing to me. But the Warrior said, I took steroids back in 1984 for bodybuilding purposes. I take them with a doctor's supervision. I get tested, and I've never had a problem. The only person, it was Rick Rude, who said that Vince made the insinuation that he wasn't big enough and he needed to get on the gas. He needed to get bigger. And they had just a litany of wrestlers testify. And the star witness for the government was Hulk Hogan. And at this time, Hulk was doing a television show, Thunder in Paradise. Not a good show. And Ric Flair and Eric Bischoff of WCW got Hulk to come out of retirement. And, Ric Flair was the champion. He said, we want you part of the team. You're going to make a difference. And they gave Hulk the contract of a lifetime. Initially a short-term deal, but it got extended. So Hulk testified at this trial the day before his big pay-per-view match against Ric Flair. And the prosecution was expecting him to implicate Vince McMahon in making other wrestlers take steroids. Where the truth was, Hulk was the one that introduced Vince to steroids. On the set of the movie they made, No Holds Barred, Hulk would get steroids, and they would actually be delivered by FedEx to the Stamford office and they would divide them up, and Hulk showed Vince how to use them, and Vince got monstrous off of them as well. So again, Hulk testified, no, wrestlers weren't forced to use steroids. Vince never forced any wrestler to use steroids. It was our own personal decision, and it really was, because if you didn't make that decision, your body was so important in the look aesthetically. If you didn't have it, you weren't going to go anywhere. And the federal government, when they try cases, it's like a 99% win rate. Vince McMahon beat the federal government. He won his case, and he definitely had bad vibes with Hulk Hogan, and they didn't speak for years. Hulk went to WCW, reinvented himself. He was a good guy forever. And in 1996, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall come over, and they formed the NWO, the New World Order. I was such a New World Order fan. If you go in my high school yearbook, basically every t-shirt I wore was NWO. I was voted in my high school yearbook most likely to be a governor of a Midwestern state and pro wrestler. This was because Jesse the Body Ventura was governor of Minnesota at the time. I got voted that. I would do the Hulk Hogan flexes. And he had a great run in WCW as a bad guy. The New World Order reinvented things. They were cool heels. They were just awesome, man. And Dominic's not going to talk to me. But we would go to Chris LaRusso's house and watch all the pay-per-views. It was so much fun. So much fun. Such a big crowd. And I used to have Monday night war parties. I would have 2 TVs set up, one for WCW, one for WWF. And it was crazy. I mean, I would have 30 people in my basement watching wrestling. That was the peak, the Attitude Era, so to speak. And then again, things went downhill for Hulk. Popularity wise, he had a creative control clause in his contract, which basically meant he controlled any outcome of his match. But not only that, he controlled any words spoken about him. So if another wrestler was cutting a promo and they said something that he didn't like, he could veto it. He could veto who he wanted to work with. He could veto, again, winning or losing matches. So the creative control. But according to Eric Bischoff, he never used that creative control that much. He did what he was told. And Kevin Nash and Scott Hall coming over, that was a game changer. And WCW beat the WWF. Eric Bischoff, his podcast is 83 weeks. And that's how long WCW beat WWF. 83 weeks. Never been done before. WCW quietly shut their doors. They had dipped in popularity. WWF bought them, brought them in, and just couldn't get things going right with the WCW wrestlers. A lot of people got fired. Finally, Hulk Hogan's father died in 2001, I believe, late 2001. And in his book, he said that his father said, Terry, go back to WWF. Go make things right, Terry. Go make things right. And this was years after his brother Alan, who I said was a Hell's Angel. Alan had died. So Hulk was all he had left. And Vince called Hulk in January of 2002 and said, "Hey, what do you think about fighting The Rock at WrestleMania?" And he said, "Yeah, let's do it." And they got the NWO back together to come into WWE. The problem was it was a WCW creation, so WWE did not treat those wrestlers of the caliber of talent that they were. They really could have done roughshed and made some money had they given them a push and let them win some matches and get over, and they didn't do that. Although WrestleMania 18 in Toronto, Hulk was starting to get more cheers. He was starting to get more cheers. Even as a bad guy, even in the NWO, even though they did an angle where they rammed Rock's car with a semi truck, and people would not boo him. They were cheering him more and cheering him more in the arenas. So in Toronto, this is the same arena where he lost to the Ultimate Warrior. He comes out to the most thunderous ovation I've ever heard. People were cheering for him, people were holding up signs, people were crying. It was just amazing to see that moment. And he and The Rock had initially gone down to Tampa to try to choreograph the match. And The Rock was saying, like, okay, duck this, do this, I'll do this, you do this. And Hogan's like, dude, like, I don't remember what I had for breakfast today. I'm not going to remember any of this. And to his credit, Rocky Johnson, The Rock's father, told The Rock, he's like, Rock, just listen to Terry. Terry will make sure everything goes as planned. And that's kind of what happened. WWF was mortified that Hogan was getting cheered more than The Rock during the match. And they did this iconic moment. It was so special where they were in the middle of the ring. They stood staring at each other and they looked left and they looked right because the crowd was just going louder, louder, and louder, fucking louder. And they hadn't even touched each other. And they were just erupting. So they do the match, and the match was phenomenal. And I give Rock all the credit in the world because Hulk, he was built, he looked great, but he was athletically limited. He couldn't do a lot. The Rock really had to bump around and make him look good, and he did that. And he sold so much for Hulk and made him look amazing. And they changed the match on the fly. Bruce Pritchard and Conrad Thompson, their podcast, Something to Wrestle With, says Hulk versus Rock, all young wrestlers should watch because you can't always predetermine what you're going to do in the ring because you don't know how the crowd's going to react. You have to be able to adjust on the fly. And that's what The Rock and Hogan did. They adjusted the match on the fly. And as I said, WWF officials were concerned because Hogan was getting cheered so much. And Hulk was able to turn it around somewhat to get Rock booed, or to get himself booed, and The Rock cheered. And the ending of the match was The Rock winning. And that was kind of the real end of everything. Hogan came back for a while in the red and yellow for several months. He left right before SummerSlam. He let Brock Lesnar, it was his first year, let Brock Lesnar beat him It was the last time, I'll never forget it. I was at UConn and we watched it together. The pay-per-view, Terry, Uwe, I think Jason McKee. Hulk won the undisputed heavyweight title from Triple H, and it was on my birthday, and I was so excited. I remember being so excited. And I remember when I played football at Connecticut, I was the only guy. I wore a Hulkamania shirt under my jersey. I didn't wear Under Armour. I didn't wear any of that. I wore, just like I got now, a Hulkamania shirt under my jersey. I felt it gave me superhuman power, even though it didn't. And I got my ass kicked all the time. So that was really the end of his run full time. He came back sporadically. 2003, another great match. He came back in February, had a rematch with The Rock, and then he had a match against Vince McMahon at WrestleMania that year in Seattle, and it was awesome. It was awesome. It was awesome because you could tell, like, legitimately they hated each other, because the points in their lives they did. And it was a secret return of Roddy Piper who interfered in the match, and Hulk won. And that turned out being his last victory in WrestleMania. He was inducted into the WWF Hall of Fame, WWE Hall of Fame in 2005, and it was like nothing I've ever seen. People cheered for him for 15 minutes straight, nonstop. He could not speak. Could not speak for 15 minutes. If you go back and you watch his induction, he cries. I mean, it's incredible to see all these people, and it was in Hollywood, that just appreciated his career and what he did for the business. And then, after, unfortunately, things started to go downhill. He had a SummerSlam match against Shawn Michaels. Did not go as planned because they were supposed to have two matches where, Hulk would win one, Shawn would win one. Hulk vetoed fighting Shawn again. So during the match with Shawn at SummerSlam, Shawn made Hulk kind of look like a fool with the way he was over bumping and overselling his moves. 2006, that was his last match in the WWE. He fought Randy Orton at SummerSlam, and I thought it was a very good match. For what Hulk could do at his age, excellent match. Compared to Goldberg having his last match on Saturday night's main event, I'd take Hulk versus Orton any day of the week. And that's kind of when things went downhill. He was having trouble with his wife, Linda. They got divorced. His son, Nick, I don't know if he was speed racing or what. He got into a car accident and almost killed, severely injured his friend, John Graziano, who was still mentally incapacitated to this day, needs constant care. John Graziano outlived Hogan. He wrote a book that was controversial. He talked about having a gun and wanting to kill himself because, his life was falling apart. He had this big mansion. His wife was gone. His son was in jail. Brooke, his daughter, kept him alive. He was always a good father. He always talked about when his kids were born, that's when he really slowed down, 88, 89. And he would talk about flying home just for a day to be with his kids and then fly back to wherever he had to be at. He just loved his kids. And unfortunately, he put everything into Brooke's music career, it didn't really work out. It didn't work out. He did the reality show Hogan Knows Best, which was a hit initially, but that's when the cracks in the family started to show. And the sex tape came out. Bubba the Love Sponge secretly recorded him having sex with his wife. This was a low point in Hogan's life, and he did it. Didn't know he was filmed, and what was also caught was him using derogatory language um, about black people that was released, um, and that blew up his career. That blew up his career. He never really came back from that. It was just tough. He was booed by WWE audiences from then on, and he tried apologizing and making a speech to the locker room, but it came off as more, hey, you never know who's taping you, you never know where you are and who's watching, and you got to be careful. It wasn't like I'm sorry for what I said. That hurt him. He went to TNA for a while, the other wrestling company, and he shouldn't have. He just couldn't go anymore. He was just too beat up. He had ended up with 20 back surgeries over the years. I remained a loyal Hulkamaniac to the end because I deep down thought he was a good person. Nobody did more for the Make-A-Wish Foundation than Hulk Hogan. He had more Make-A-Wishes than anyone. I think he was one of the most, or if not the most, sought after Make-A-Wish person in the 80s. It was revealed, and he did every one of them. Always signed autographs. And Kevin Nash and Scott Hall used to complain about it. He's like, Hogan would just sign everything and everything. He'd never leave. He loved kids. He just always wanted to make them happy. And he just truly appreciated his fans. I heckled him. Well, no, I bothered him several times. When I caught a nice northern pike, and I had my Hulkamania shirt and hat on, and I showed the fish, and I tweeted it to him, and he retweeted it. A couple other times, I had my Hulkamania Hawaiian shirt on. I Facebooked and tweeted him, and he gave me a like. It's out of harassment. And just in closing, I only got to watch him wrestle once in my life that I remember. I don't remember as a kid when they came to Utica. The one time I got to watch him wrestle, and it's funny, Mike Least, he doesn't really like me right now. Mike and Matt Jaffoon, I got them to come to a SmackDown on the 4th of July. It was taped early. Yeah, it was taped Tuesday. Back then, SmackDown was taped Tuesday or Thursday. So I drove to Boston with, actually, that's not true. Annabelle Abdella, one of my good high school friends, best friends from elementary school. Annabelle drove to Yukon, and then we went to Boston and picked up Mike and Matt Jaffoon, and Hulk was teaming with Edge at the time. This is the summer of 2002, and they were fighting. They were going against Billy Gunn and Chuck Palumbo, who were doing this homosexual angle, if they were homosexual lovers or not. It was hilarious, but they were the tag champions, and that was one belt. Hulk had never been a tag champion. Edge was a huge Hulk Hogan fan growing up. He was teaming with him, and we got tickets for it. Um, Mike and Matt did not have the greatest time. Mike was like, "Can we go? Can we go yet? Can we go yet?" Um, Hulk was on. They played his old music, "Real American." I'm a real American. He came out waving the American flag, man, and the crowd went nuts. Absolutely crazy for him. And he and Edge defeated Billy Gunn and Chuck Palumbo for the tag titles. I got to witness that. That was the only match I ever saw of Hulk. The only match I witnessed in person. I'll never forget it. It was just, man, I just felt like I could run through a brick wall after. I was so excited, so hyped up. Wow. Wow. That just never wavered. He was just always my hero, always my idol. And I know people say wrestling's the F word, fake. It's as physical as it gets. It's very, very challenging to pull off. Communicating without people seeing you, knowing what you're doing in the ring, the other person knowing what you're doing and not running into each other, bopping heads. You have to really, really hone your craft. And Hulk was a master at that. And he just had so much charisma. He can make you love you, he can make you hate you. And just for me, it was so sad at the first Saturday night's main event when he got booed out of the building. Just booed to holy hell. And I know his son had gotten arrested for a DWI last year, which didn't help. And he was there just like a good father. He came right down. Unfortunately, the marriages, he was married to Linda for 20 something years. And then I think he was with Jennifer 10 years, 8 years. And then he just married a new wife. I didn't want him to fall into the Ric Flair game of marriages. And I hadn't cried or been upset for family members dying, people I know dying, Hulk Hogan dying. That tore me up because the person that I wanted or probably needed to call, I couldn't. And it was a very, very sad day. Just very sad. You lose your idol, your hero. And in my case, I just see it as, yeah, I'm in my 40s, and yeah, I'm a mark who loves pro wrestling. But you see that it's your childhood. It's gone. I knew it was in bad health. They were trying to hide it. I didn't know it was as bad as it was. They were posting pictures of them at the beach and doing things, but they were older pictures. People knew it. And there were rumors he was in a coma, but they kept it close to the vest. So I never knew. I just never saw it coming. And he's the reason that pro wrestling is around today. He's the reason that pro wrestling is on television. He's the reason the WWE is a multi-billion, or TKO now is a multi-billion-dollar company. My one dream, I had two dreams. I wanted to meet Jewel. I was a huge Jewel fan. I wanted to meet Hulk Hogan. I never got to meet him. And I had an opportunity. There was a book signing, I think, or signing in Syracuse. I didn't go to. I think there may have been one in Albany that I didn't go to. And man, I regret it now. I regret it. I regret it with all my heart. No, my father's had a tremendous influence on my life. Unfortunately, I just haven't followed it like I should. Hulk Hogan influenced everything. I just looked up to him. I looked up to him. I revered him. And he was special. Terry Gene Bollea. Not a great athlete, but he made you feel. He knew how to make you feel. He could take you on an emotional roller coaster because nobody knew how to work a crowd better than the Hulkster. So I have rambled for long enough. It's going to be a tough one. It's going to be a tough one. Well, brother, I'll see you again. I will see you again, and I'm hoping you're getting a nice body slam on Andre the Giant, the gates of heaven. And hopefully you get a rematch with the Warrior and can get the 1, 2, 3. Love you, Hulkster.